Hello there and happy Tuesday. I'm running a little behind today because I got carried away. Both of my kids had volleyball games tonight and I got wrapped up in it. So anyway, if you're joining us tonight, my name is Julie Hirschberg. I am a neurologic physical therapist, the owner, founder of Reactive Therapy and Wellness here in the Los Angeles area. And I love to join you all a couple times a week at least and talk about what we're learning, what we're reading, what we're doing here at Reactive. And this week I actually got an email from a fellow physical therapist. Thank you so much. I love when people send questions because they're usually not the only person that has that question. And so I got this email that said, I really appreciate your course on MedBridge on F&D. By the way, if you're on MedBridge, Mike Studer and I did a series on F&D, persistent post-concussion symptoms, 3PD. It's really great. So she said, thanks. She's working with a young woman with functional paralysis. She has trace movements in her legs. That's really common. And she asked, what would you suggest for treatment for a home exercise program? All she can currently do is isometrics in her knee and hip. Would you issue isometrics as a home program? And thanks for the suggestion. So I emailed her back and I said, this is a really great question. I'm going to do a video and let's share it with the world. What would you do for functional paralysis? I see my friend Zach on here too. Zach, what would you do for functional paralysis? We got to help a person out here, but I have lots of ideas, of course, but I wanted to give some real concrete things. When you see a person with functional paralysis, you can go many different directions. And this is why I'm a firm believer in having a framework to guide you down a pathway. So as you know, we use our pie chart framework so that we can think of all the contributors and underlying issues to functional paralysis. So motor control being the biggest piece. Sensory is often a really big component of functional paralysis. So before I can say, oh yeah, do this in your HEP, I gotta know, like, are these pieces underlying the functional paralysis? So motor control, sensory, autonomic has a big one for sure. Are there lifestyle or psychosocial pieces? Are there physical impairments? So something that we see a lot in folks that have functional paralysis are things like EDS, so Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or a hypermobility syndrome as well. Maybe autonomic dysfunction like POTS. And so we want to screen for those pieces that might be underlying or contributing to the functional paralysis. So that's my first piece of advice. If you see functional paralysis, you don't just go to strengthening, you want to see what's underlying it. Now, I mentioned autonomic, so certainly want to screen for things like postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome or POTS, but other autonomic pieces as well. So one of the things that we do for screening is we use a measure called the SHUT-D for folks who may have a very shut down nervous system. The SHUT-D is literally for shutdown. And that might be a component of what's happening in the person's nervous system that's contributing to a functional paralysis. So that's a really great measure to screen. And then if that is the case, we need to explore why, right? Why is there shutdown in the nervous system? Is it an autonomic issue, a sensory issue? Is there a psychosocial component of that? Is that person safe in their environment, in therapy, and so on? So first step in functional paralysis, get to the underlying issue, understand the pie chart and the contributing factors. The biggest ones that I see are the autonomic and sensory components, and potentially a totally shut down nervous system, which can be a combination of things, but it can include psychosocial influences. So look at that first. Now, one of the things that I want to give you a couple of thoughts from outside of the motor control realm first, and that is sensory. So often when people have a functional paralysis, they may have a sensory processing disorder. So I would want to check for that. They may have impaired joint proprioception or kinesthesia, and just not a good connection and good feedback from the body. And so things like approximation, things like using an abdominal binder, we use something called the body braid, things that give information to the joints can help activate some of those automatic muscle movements. So we can use sensation to help drive muscle activation. Now, if you haven't already gotten it, you should definitely download what Brittany created last week, which is the 10 things to avoid in functional neurologic disorders. This was for all you ortho PTs. All of those things that you might traditionally do in ortho PT that you wouldn't want to do in functional neurologic disorders. And one of those, Brittany shared this in a video, would be giving some of those internally focused cues like squeeze the glutes, squeeze the quads, come on quads, go, 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 go. Like some of those things that like I can remember doing with clients after their knee surgeries, right? You're trying to like wake up muscles. Well, that is not what you want to do with functional paralysis. In fact, you want to avoid it at all costs because that actually drives the abnormal self-directed attention, which actually is part of the cause of the functional paralysis. So you don't want to do that. And I know the question was about isometrics. It's not that you would never do isometrics, but isometrics tend to be really body focused. Could you do isometrics in a less body focused way, right? So maybe that's in a functional position. So I love sitting on a ball. Those also provide a lot of proprioceptive input, and you get essentially what you want to do with functional paralysis and functional movement disorders in general is unlock those automatic movements. And as Zach is saying, external focus of attention. So rather than an isometric and let's watch that muscle and get it to contract, let's put that person in an environment where it's a goal-oriented movement. So we could take the isolated movement out. We could take the attention to the individual muscles and do I feel them? Are they working? You know, I have a lot of weakness here. Take that into an activity, a goal orientation, a really strong external focus. The more fun, the better. Somebody asked me like, well, what exactly would this be at the conference that I taught at this weekend? And one of my favorite examples is a young kid that I worked out who had functional paralysis of his legs. And we took he had a little stuffed animal. We strapped it to his leg. We had him doing roller coaster moves with the stuffed animal on the leg. Strong external focus to the body. That's the kind of thing that unlocks. So if you think of functional paralysis as being this kind of misfire in the brain where your movements are almost locked up, right? I want to think of like, what's the key to unlocking that? It's automatic goal-directed movement. So an external focus of attention would be one of your best bets. Now, if you're noticing they only have trace muscle contraction, I would guess in an externally focused environment, goal-oriented, really setting up the environment well so that the attention is driven away from the body, that there's more than trace in there. But some people, no. I mean, there's definitely been folks that I've seen with functional paralysis. You could have the best, most fun, externally focused task and still not get muscle activation. And for those folks, that's where I think we have to go in with sensory and autonomic activation to drive some of that to the motor system. But I always start with that external focus first. So let's summarize where we have so far. So first, if you see functional paralysis, you want to screen for that whole pie chart of underlying issues. Clearly there's a motor control issue, but sensory, autonomic, lifestyle, psychosocial, and yes, physical impairments like a connective tissue disorder or joint hypermobility. So those are really common. We see those a lot in functional paralysis. You want to screen for those. Second, take an approach, a strong motor control approach to unlock automatic movement with an external goal-oriented focus. Now, with paralysis, you can't be just like, well, stand up and run and then touch this target. Well, no, not usually. So that might have to be a little graded, sitting up on a really tall mat with the feet supported, maybe a weighted blanket over the lap, and doing some balloon toss and getting automatic movement that way through the trunk and legs. Maybe it is on prone on elbows and getting some movement through the legs and rolling. Maybe it's in quadruped. So you might have to, and actually you will have to look at other positions. One of the things that I love is the treadmill on the wall. So legs are up here, a treadmill like that. So really, really changing the focus for the person, and that's all under motor control. I love sensory strategies. So this could be adding weight, even adding resistance to improve proprioceptive input, adding vibration. Now, this might actually make it worse. So this, you really have to test this out with the person. And I think really good treatment starts with really great assessment. So sensory strategies and then autonomic strategies, particularly if their nervous system is in a real shutdown. I think the autonomic combined with the psychosocial sense of safety is a really, really big piece to allow that person's movement to reappear and their nervous system to regulate from a really shut down state. So I think that was way more than 5 things. I had a plan for 5, but I shared many more than 5. And I just so appreciate your questions. So by the way, this is not medical advice. This is advice directed to healthcare providers to help their clients with functional neurologic disorders. So if you're a fellow healthcare providers, first of all, thank you. Thank you for being here and being in this community. And if you have questions, like this great person who emailed me this great question about functional paralysis and isometrics, feel free to email me. Send me a direct message. I love chatting with you all. I learn a lot from your questions. So thank you for that. And if you're working with people with functional paralysis, like, try out these things, move beyond what we see, what we might do traditionally in strengthening and isometrics and things like that. You can pretty much throw that out the window. I'm a never say never kind of person, but you can throw a lot of those traditional things out the window. Some of those things can actually make the symptoms worse and really turn on your motor control, sensory, autonomic hats to drive changes in the nervous system. So I hope that was really helpful. Thank you so much again for the great question and for letting me share. I love it. So join me on Friday, by the way. I've been reading through some new literature. Great article on multiple sclerosis and functional neurologic disorders that I can't wait to share. And this comes from another question I was asked this weekend of like, how do you tease out when there's a couple of disorders together? So we're going to talk about that on Friday. Join me then. And if you want to catch all of our videos, I'll send out the links to these articles, our free download with the 10 things to avoid. Sign up for our newsletter. You can go to reactiveeducation.com if you're a healthcare provider, reactivept.com if you're a person with a neurologic disorder. Sign up. We send this whole thing out every week to you all, and then you can go to reactiveeducation.com if you want to get that 10 things to avoid with functional neurologic disorders. I think that's a really helpful resource. So thanks so much and have a great night, everyone.